Thank you so much, Shannon Mulaire, for being with me today on the WaveCapital's guest speaker series on relationship building in a team environment. You're my 111th guest. How are you today, Shannon?
I'm awesome. And I feel like there's something special about 111. So thank you for having me.
Yes, absolutely. 111, unique number. And I'm so grateful to interview you today. And thank you so much again for your time. You've had an incredible career in broadcast media, and now you're in the public relations world. Looking forward to hearing all about your journey. When you think of relationship building in a team environment, Shannon, what does relationship building mean to you? And what has it meant for your professional career?
Relationship building, to put it very simply, is literally everything. It's been everything, no matter your career, particularly now that I'm in a communications field. It literally is the basis for every single thing we do. And the relationships that we build, it's the reason why people keep coming back to us at this point and how we build our business model. I mean, there's a million PR firms out there, right? You could go with anybody. But what I always say to my team is anyone can write a press release. Anyone can come up with a strategy. Some are better than others. But if all things are equal, otherwise, who are you going to choose? You're going to choose the people who you have a relationship with, who you like more. And it literally comes down to that sometimes because they have to put their faith and their trust in you. And for my current role, it's a huge part of what I do is just maintaining those relationships, building new relationships. It's also a big part of what got me to where I am at this point in my career.
Yes, absolutely. And you started your career in Fort Myers, Florida, and then you moved up to Tampa Bay at Fox 13, and then you relocated to Massachusetts. You had mentioned to me offline that you're originally from up north, and you were a general assignment reporter for Fox 25. You spent time as a weekend anchor and a morning anchor for Fox 25. Then you became a news anchor for NBC News. And now currently you're with Nickerson, Director of PR and Media Relations, and you've been there for a little over 2.5 years. So I love that you had the incredible experience in broadcast media and then you transitioned to public relations. But when you first started in your career, were expectations met or exceeded? Was journalism everything you thought it would be?
Honestly, I loved my job, loved it. And I think even more so on the front end when I was a street reporter, a producer, a writer, and I was really in it every day. I think back so fondly on, and I mentioned this to you offline, but my first job was in Fort Myers, yes. And I was actually started as a writer there. I had no desire initially to be on television. And I had started when I was in grad school up here in Boston, producing some of the radio shows that we were doing. And I loved it. It was like all I wanted to do. But then one day somebody called out sick, and we were a very small station, very small. I mean, we all did a little bit of everything. And they were like, well, this girl's out sick. You're going out to do a story today. And I remember just sweating and being so nervous about it. But then I loved it. I loved getting out of the building. I loved meeting people who my path would have never crossed with in a million years had I not been sent on a certain story. The interviews I got to do every day was different. The rush of having a deadline. I mean, I can't say enough about it. I worked extra days for fun because I just loved what I was doing and I loved telling a good story. So by the time I got to Tampa, I hadn't actually been a full-time reporter and I probably had no business getting a full-time assignment reporter job there. But I think they saw my passion for what I did and how quickly I had picked up in the short time that I had been doing it, what I could do. And I adored it. And I said this to you offline as well. I worked with some amazing people in Tampa. If I could have picked that station up and moved it back up north, I would have stayed there for the rest of my life. I can't say enough about the people who I worked with there. And I think that experience, particularly those 2 years in Tampa, were some peak journalism times because it was a station that let us tell stories. They didn't cut us to a minute for a package. It was like you had 2 minutes, 2.5 minutes to tell a real story. They let you go out and find your own story. It wasn't like you have to cover the news of the day all the time. I mean, of course we did, but it just was such a wonderful experience. And I'm someone who learns by seeing and watching all the people around me. So being surrounded by that many, I mean, legendary, some of them are still there and they're like greats in the broadcast journalism world. And I just feel like I was incredibly lucky to get that job there and get to be there, even for just a couple years. So, long answer to a short question. Yes, I had a great time. I loved it. I feel like I got so much out of it. Eventually, I came back up north and I was still a reporter for a little while. And then I moved into anchoring, which is more lucrative, I guess you could say. But I became an indoor cat, which it wasn't quite as fun as being a reporter and being out on the street. But it's a different skill. And it was one that I got really good at and I enjoyed for different reasons. But I truly loved my job for a very long time. And I was very lucky to get to do a lot of very cool things.
Well, that's awesome because, Fox 13 Tampa Bay is like one of the two most recognizable stations in Tampa. I would say the other one being WFLA. And I did an internship at WFLA. I was part of my high school graduation requirement. I graduated from the Tampa Preparatory School, but I got to know Ann Dwyer very well. I'm
Yes,
sure you remember her because
of
her
course.
stepson was in one of my classes at Tampa Prep. And I remember shadowing her and learned a lot just by observing. I'm the same type of
Yeah.
person. I have to learn by seeing. And it was just great experiences having grown up in Tampa and then getting to know the familiar faces. And as I was mentioning to you offline, I remember your newscast when you interviewed Billy Mays because Billy Mays lived a couple streets over from me in Odessa, Florida, not too far from Lutz. And I remember watching Billy Mays and his colleague. He was on the Conan O'Brien show with Lisa Kudrow and Lou Costello. And then just 5 days later, after he was doing a work project in Philadelphia, you could tell the story much better than me. You had went to Tampa International and interviewed him, and your interview was the last live interview he had ever done, and you were the reporter. And I just remember that so vividly. And so when we connected, I came across your interview online. And that's the reason why I wanted to reach out because I saw that you have journalism background and I have a journalism background and I saw some synergies and but would love to get your perspective. That's a good example of you covering an assignment. So for my audience, please tell me and share with me like what was that experience like?
It was one of those things where I was the weekend reporter at the time because I was one of the youngest people there. It was sort of low man on the pole, if you will. But we had my photographer, Juan Sayets, and I had been sent out to Tampa International because we had heard over the scanners that there was a plane that had a rough landing. There might be some injuries. Pretty standard news story, so to speak. And so we drove out there and we were down in the baggage area where we knew that people were collecting their baggage from that plane. And all of a sudden, down the escalator, we see Billy Mays, and he's so recognizable. I mean, you just the beard and everything, and everyone's seen the OxyClean commercials, and he's just this larger than life presence. And so he's coming down the escalator, and I'm like, no way he was on that flight. But me being sort of an extrovert was like, I'm going to go talk to him. So it's the job of a reporter. And so we went over and he was like, hey, Shannon. I was like, he was a watcher of our station. And so he was wonderful. He was on the flight. He decided to give us a whole interview. He talked about it. He talked about having, flown from the West Coast and been on the late shows and just how busy he was. And he was a mile a minute those days and just all the things he was taping and very high energy. And so we did our little story and, we used a bunch of his sound bites, obviously, since he was such a high profile person, filed the story, went home. This was a Saturday night. And then I woke up the next morning to a handful of text messages that he had passed away and that I was the last person to interview him, obviously totally unbeknownst to us at the time. And it hit me like a ton of bricks that morning. I just remember feeling the weight of something that almost inexplicable that we had talked to him in that weird serendipitous way. And I'm a big believer of things sort of happen at times when they're supposed to and for reasons. And in some ways, I'm grateful. And we got to have that conversation, but it was just so heavy to hear that the next morning and know that story became something totally different. And then obviously over the next few days, we used the sound bites from that story and many other follow-up stories that we did. And then it blew up and TMZ was calling me. And so I went on TMZ and it just was, again, this larger than life story that sort of took on a identity of its own. But that, obviously a terrible situation. And we were so sad to have to report that. But it was just an example of one of those days where you have no idea what's going to happen. You set out to do one thing, something else happens, and then you don't know where your day is going to take you. And that's one of the things I enjoyed about news in some respect, was that. And that I got to share a little bit of him. You got to tell a little bit of a story, and not that it was any solace to anybody, but had we not done that, I don't know what the last thing of him would have been that we would have been playing over and over again. But it was wild. I'll never forget that. I remember very distinctly that feeling when I woke up the next morning, being very taken aback by the whole situation.
And I could tell just watching your interview, you seem so serious, like professional, but you could tell that you were shocked because you're on TV. I could tell that also you didn't want to show maybe your emotion as much, but I would imagine you were processing as you were reporting on what had just transpired, and would love to know, like, just how did you process it in the weeks and months thereafter? Because you learn in journalism school that once you get out in the field in your professional career, professors try to teach you there are going to be times that you have tough assignments and there is an emotion, human element to it. But I mean, that's like a textbook example of what could happen in the field, because it's not something you prepare for. But was curious, just from your journalistic training and just from a human emotional standpoint, what allowed you to get through that reporting and how you process it thereafter.
Yeah. I mean, you touch on something that I think is a big part of every journalist's career. And honestly, I can tell you a different situation that I always think of when people ask about this. But in that situation, I think it's one of the most challenging things sometimes for journalists, is because you're not supposed to feel these things, but you're telling these stories and you still want to convey an emotion without showing it yourself. And so it's challenging in the sense that you have to put together a story that does that on its own without you, being demonstrative of the emotion itself. So it's hard. It's really hard. And I was so young then. I mean, that was a long time ago. And I think I was still figuring that out. So more than anything, I hadn't watched that until you mentioned it for years. And when I watch it back, honestly, I think some of it, I was serious. I think some of it was nerves, because I want to do it justice, to talking about this. And it's clearly a very serious situation, but I didn't want to be over the top. And I almost didn't know how to act. But I think over time, you develop some tools to better manage that. It never gets easier to cover stories that are sad. I think that's one of the things that people talk about in journalism. Sometimes it's the reason people leave it. Ultimately, we all have that one story that sticks with us, or one that stuck with me. And actually, it was from my time in Florida, and it ended up being a story on Dateline. Maybe you remember Denise Amberly, and she had been kidnapped and was ultimately murdered. And she had somehow managed to call 911, but there was a cross somehow in the communications. And after this, there was a big review of how the 911 calls were directed, and they missed their opportunity to rescue her, and she was killed. And she was a sheriff's deputy's daughter. And she had left all kinds of clues in the car, and everybody said that had to have been on purpose because she was the sheriff's deputy's daughter. She pulled out parts of her hair, like left things under the carpet. She had two little kids. She was taken straight from her home. It was one of those stories. And I was in court day after day listening to the whole thing and everything that happened to her. And I had nightmares about it. I mean, those are the things like people don't talk about as a journalist, but that stuff sticks with you. And I think especially I wasn't even a parent at that time, but even more so when you become a parent and you hear stories about children, it's a challenge. It is a real challenge. And it's one of those things that I think ultimately you have to let the story speak for itself and try to keep as neutral as possible. Everybody knows it's sad, and that's not my job. It's just to tell the story, and the story hopefully itself then conveys those emotions. But it's a challenge, period. It was something I carried those things with me all the time.
I know, and it sounds so familiar. And if I'm thinking of the correct story, what you just described, I want to say that I read at the time something very similar to that. And I wonder if it's the same story. But I know that when you were at Fox 13 Tampa Bay, I was just graduating from college and I was going to school up in North Carolina. And so I probably from afar just had at the time maybe gleaned over that story. But these stories are very tragic. I mean, there's probably better words to describe them, but it's upsetting, especially what we've seen in the last couple of months with the Nancy Guthrie story. When I worked at NBC News in DC, Savannah Guthrie was my colleague. I worked on the national assignment desk in Washington, and I would, say hello to her. I sat next to her producer, Doug Adams, and, I helped on air anchors and producers with assignment related activities throughout the day. And I know that you also worked at NBC too. I also worked at ESPN, and being that, you're originally from up north, but I spent time in Bristol, Connecticut at ESPN. And I look at all my journalistic experiences, and, you think about like all the exciting moments, you think about all of the tragic moments, and then stories in between. I mean, do you feel that throughout your journalistic career, you had more stories that you covered that were maybe similar to what you described, or would love to get your thoughts on what your thoughts are as a journalist seeing the Nancy Guthrie story, because, obviously there's the NBC connection there, but also stories that were happy and positive and things that you've enjoyed covering your career as well.
Yeah, well, I've been lucky that I've had some happy ones, so I'll get to that. But I think the first thing, so I actually did work at 30 Rock for about a year doing Early Today, which comes on before the Today Show. And so I got to be in that building, which was amazing. I don't think I ever crossed paths with Savannah Guthrie, but when this whole thing started, it just was so bizarre from the get-go. And my brain immediately goes to she was targeted because of who she is. And we don't know still, right? We have no idea what happened to her, who it was. There's so many unanswered questions, but it does raise the question of how much of your personal life do you share as a journalist on television? I mean, as an anchor, people follow you in your personal life as well, and your social media, et cetera. And you do share these glimpses. I mean, she had her mother on the show quite a bit. And I remember something she said in one of the interviews, maybe it was with Hoda Kotb, that she's worried it was because of who she is. And I just thought to myself, this is the reason why I'm so protective of my children, of their privacy, of not wanting their faces now that they're older. When they're babies, babies are babies. But it just raises this whole question about how much do you have to draw that line? Because so much of those morning shows is personality based, and it drives ratings for people to know more about you and to know more about the other side of you. But then you see something like this happen. And again, we don't know, but it makes you want to hold tight to your personal life and really draw that line between work and your personal life. And it can be blurry for people who work those jobs. And I think any morning anchor around the country, even at local stations, that they have big followings because people wake up with them every morning. They feel like they know them. And that's a wonderful thing. But then you hear something like this, and you feel exposed in some ways where you have let a lot of people see some very private parts of your life, including who your family is. And it's scary. We all want to be able to share those things, but I think this day and age, you have to think twice about doing that.
My wife and I, and we have two kids, and, a 3.5-year-old, and then our daughter was just born.
Brand new baby. Congratulations.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it. And I feel the same way you do, because we want to be very protective of our families and our kids. And there is a fine line. And as a podcast host, I channel all of my energy through my interviews of wanting to talk about relationship building, because I always say relationship building is the essence of humanity. And I love the fact that I can have my podcast to be able to talk about, real life experiences that have to do about my guests, their professional life, what got them started in their respective businesses, who were their mentors, who inspired them, talking to them if they choose to, if they're comfortable with talking about their families and what they like to do. And that's why we're having this conversation, because I find it very interesting that you were also a guest on the Tonight Show with Jimmy Fallon. Wanted to ask you about that story as well. And just the NBC connection, and the fact that, you just seem like someone who really loves what she does. And because I've always had an interest in public relations, and people have always come to me and say, like, Garrett, ever thought about public relations? I said, I love PR. I mean, I had to learn about it in college at the Huston School of Journalism and Media at UNC Chapel Hill. So that's why I'm fascinated to talk to you too, because you're with the organization Nickerson and you're the director of PR and media relations. But the human interest stories I see on Good Morning America or other morning shows, I mean, those are positive
Right.
stories. I mean, those stories are to inspire and to make people feel connected to these shows and to real people who are doing extraordinary things. But the drawback is, and we've talked about it, is the stories that unfortunately could make people feel fearful and be a little bit more reserved. But journalism, in my opinion, it's all about being an informed citizen of our country and knowing what's happening in our country and around the world. So because we had those journalism pedigrees, I don't want to say people like you and me are immune to the negative stories. It's just that it comes with the territory. And I imagine you would agree.
It does, and I think after some time doing it, I don't wanna say you become numb to it because that's not what it is, but it does become normal in the sense that it's what you deal with in a news cycle, and you deal with death and destruction and kidnappings and all that sort of stuff, and you have to learn to sort of separate your mind out because it's so easy to get sucked into the emotion of it. You have to go knock on a door of a parent whose child was just kidnapped, etcetera. It's a lot to manage. Having said that, there's a lot of wonderful things that I've been able to cover and experiences I've gotten to have. And I think, I mean, it's part of life, right? You have highs and lows. And I think the lows make the highs even higher and having that variation in stories sometimes. I mean, how many like playoff runs have sports teams in Boston gone on that I've got to be outside, the garden talking about the Celtics for days in a row? And it's like, this is my job. It's amazing. I was on the field after the Super Bowl in Atlanta and Mercedes-Benz Stadium when the Patriots won there. I mean, it was like I kind of pinch myself sometimes when I think about what I got to do in that job, and I'll never come that close to those types of things again. I mean, I'm sitting in the nosebleeds now when I go to those places, but but it was just incredible to have that access and to be able to interview interesting people. When it was good, it was so good, and I just feel like I literally would always pinch myself, like, I can't believe I get to do this for a living. So, the Jimmy Fallon thing, it's funny. So, I wasn't technically on his show, although it looks like it in the interview. This was when NBC decided to own their own station up in Boston. We launched it basically. I was the evening anchor for them, and at the time, Jimmy Fallon was just launching his show. So, this had to be almost 10 years ago now. And they invited a select few main evening anchors from NBC owned and operated stations around the country to come to his studio and do extended interviews with him. And of course, I was like, yes, please. That sounds amazing. So I got to sit down. They actually ended up giving me extra time because we were hitting it off. And I think it was like an 8.5 minute interview in the end. And it's on YouTube somewhere because I just watched it again the other day because somebody reminded me about it. But he was a delight and just so much fun to chit chat with. I honestly forgot that we were being recorded. And I was like, "Oh, get it together. Let's not fangirl around Jimmy Fallon here." But I had loved him for so long. I just thought he was so great and so funny. And from Saturday Night Live, like before his show, even, and just how he could never stop himself from laughing when he was in the middle of these skits. So that was another highlight, getting to sit there with him and have that sort of memorialized in that YouTube video that I got to sit there and talk to him for 8 minutes was just so awesome.
That's really cool. And when you relocated back up north, were you always a Patriots fan? Were you always a Celtics fan? What were your sports teams growing up?
So I'm a sports nut since I grew up in Connecticut, which I affectionately call no man's land because you end up being a New York fan or a Boston fan, depending on where you are. And technically, in my part of Connecticut, we were much closer to New York, but I was never a huge New York sports fan. Don't come me, New York people. So I was always a Boston sports fan. And then I went to school for high school in New Hampshire and then college in Boston and grad school in Boston. So at some point, I had spent more of my life in the Boston, New England area than I had in Connecticut. And so it just was a natural sort of progression of, and then throw in the Revs. And I'm a big soccer nut as well. And now the Legacy, there's the women's professional team that just started up here. We're just so lucky to have all the teams that we do around here. I mean, I got to sit through it was freezing rain and cold in February, but so many championship parades, from the Patriots. It just, you don't care that you just had, freezing rain drip down the back of your neck because I'm like, oh, there's Julian Edelman. There's Gronk. There's Tom Brady. It just was so fun.
That's awesome. I had Tom Brady's executive director of his TB12 Foundation. She was a guest on my podcast, Lisa Borges, and
Yeah.
I had Drew Bledsoe on recently on my
Oh,
podcast.
no way. That's awesome.
Yes, and he owns a winery, his family winery in Washington State in Walla Walla. My wife and I are originally from the New York metropolitan area. She was actually conceived down here, but her parents are from Long Island. My father was from Long Island. My mom grew up in the Bronx. She has a couple of cousins who, although they grew up in New York or split time between Florida and New York, they're Boston
How did that
Reds fans.
happen?
Yeah, through and through because of their dad. And then I have family members in Southern California, but they love Boston so much when they travel to the East Coast that they're Patriots fans. And interesting because Bill Belichick, when he left the Patriots, he took
Uh,
North
it's
Carolina
a
down
good city. Yep.
where I went to college. And I had Michael Lombardi also as a guest on my podcast. And Michael Lombardi won a couple Super Bowls with Bill
Sure.
Belichick when he was on staff there. So there's the Patriots
Yeah.
connection there. But they're great sports teams to love. And my wife and I were in Boston in late 2024. We love that city. I mean, it's
It's a
such a
great
beautiful
city.
city. And what do you love about living in the Northeast again? And is Boston your favorite city, or do you have others having worked in so many places in
Yeah.
journalism?
I mean, Boston is home for sure. There's something about Boston. I can remember when I got my job back up here, and that was a dream. I would have cleaned the toilets at Fox 25 if they'd offered me that job, but they offered me a morning reporter job. So I took that one. And I can remember flying in to Logan and seeing the skyline and just tearing up a little bit because it was just such a dream to be able to come home and do what I did for a living. And I just never had that anywhere else. And even though I wasn't born here, like I said, I had spent so much of my adult life here in formative years that it really became my home. And now all three of my children were born here and have grown up here. And my oldest is 13 now, which is wild. But there's something about Boston. It's a city, obviously, but it feels much more like a town than New York, which I love for different reasons, but I don't think I could ever live in New York. And it was the city I grew up going to, so I know it well, but I just always felt much more comfortable. And Boston felt more manageable, although our roads are always a mess, and so is the tea. But I don't know, there's something quirky and wonderful about the city and all the schools, and there's so much packed into this small little town like city that there's still stuff that I'm discovering now and so many wonderful restaurants. And the warm season is so short that I feel like everyone feels like they have to pack everything they can into that time. And being in the city in the summer is just one of my favorite things. So we're almost there, which is exciting. But I do love New York. And I did love Fort Myers was actually a great place because the Red Sox would come down to JetBlue Park. And so we got a lot of sports down there as well. But the beaches were amazing. We were 10 minutes from all of these amazing beaches, which I'm a huge beach person. The beach is my happy place. So I really liked it there as well. But Boston has always felt like home.
I lived in Naples for a short time when my parents relocated my sister and me. We moved down as a family from northern New Jersey to Naples. And I lived there for 4 years. And then that's when I moved to Lutz and then Odessa, suburbs of Tampa. And then I went to school at North Carolina. But to your point about Fort Myers, having lived just a little bit south of Naples, it is very peaceful and relaxing. And Florida has a rich, baseball history, especially in Fort Myers and Tampa. And when my wife and I, when we were in Boston in late 2024, we loved doing the Red Sox Fenway Park tour. That was amazing. I don't know if you've had a chance to do that.
It's been a while, but yeah, it's
Yeah.
amazing. Yeah.
Yeah, it's incredible. And just love the rich sports town that Boston is. But also you mentioned the food, the culture, the warmth. The people are so nice. It's such a clean city, such an outdoors type of place. And I do love the concentration of colleges and universities because I'm big on academics too. So it's, getting to tour Harvard and places like that. I mean, it was incredible. With respect to your public relations career, past 2.5 years, how did you find a company like Nickerson and, what got you to pull away from journalism per se in the broadcast media sense and become the director at Nickerson? Love to hear your story.
Yeah. I think it's not unusual for people to go from journalism to PR to some sort of communications. And I think for a lot of people, they get a little tired of the rat race and there's no remote working when you work at a television station. The news goes on at 4, 5, 6, 9, and 11 every night, and you don't get a lot of flexibility. And as someone with three kids, and I had done it for a while, and I think I was just a little burned out in part, but I didn't feel like I was done in the sense that I I'm a very motivated and competitive person, and I felt like I had a lot left in the tank. I just wanted something that worked with my life a little bit better. So after I left, I took some time off and decided to just enjoy that summer with my kids, because when do you ever get to do that sort of thing? And then I set myself a deadline, and I kind of a nerd, so I made spreadsheets and, pros and cons of all these different companies, and then just started reaching out, and I had a lot of conversations. And this is where I come back to the relationship building, because I had a lot of people give time to me when I was starting to try and figure out that next step that didn't have to. And they had coffee with me. They sat and talked about their experiences, because I didn't just want to take the first thing that came my way. I really wanted it to feel right. And hearing all the different experiences from people who had either made that same move, or just people who had always been in PR, some sort of internal communications, because there's so many different routes you can go, was invaluable. And some of those relationships I've maintained, and they've sort of come back around in weird different ways that I could have never anticipated. But I found Lisa, who's the owner of the firm, and we connected because she saw I had written her a note asking to talk, basically, and was interested in hearing about her. She saw that I had run the Boston Marathon, I think the previous year, and she had run maybe the year before. And so we connected over that actually initially, because I think I said something like, wow, you look a lot more upright than I did when I crossed the finish line. And she thought that was funny. And she was like, you know what? And she would tell you, like, that was one of the first things I think she liked about me, was that I was personable. And she thought, okay, this girl is smart. She's personable. I can teach her the rest. And from that point, it was like, it worked. And within 6 months, she had promoted me to be in charge of all PR at our company as well. And because I started as just the director of media relations, having come from TV, natural fit. But I picked it up pretty quickly, and she promoted me pretty quickly. And now there are three of us who are essentially helping to lead the agency, because Lisa sort of stepped out a little bit to be CEO of another company, which is wonderful. So it allows her to do that. And she's given us such a high ceiling. And I think that was one of the most important things to me, was I didn't want to feel like a cog in a wheel where I was like, do you get promoted in 2 years to this next step? It was like, no, I'm ready to work. And if I put in the work, is there a return? And the answer was yes. And I think that's what's, kept me going, and being able to use the skills that I had from television. It's almost like the inverse of news, right? We know what makes a good story. We know who we can try to loop into something, what might make sense, what wastes their time and what doesn't. And I get to do it from home. So, so there's that.
That's awesome. And I love the fact that, Lisa was willing to train you. And that's so refreshing, because training doesn't come around that often when it comes to companies, because they expect people to either have highly applicable skills, and they don't really emphasize transferable skills. But you had the transferable skills and applicable skills, but you also had someone who is willing to train you. And because you're very intelligent and you're a quick study, you were able to retain the information and apply the information very quickly. And within 6 months, you're getting promoted. So that's kudos to you, because it showed that, because you have that determination and willingness to work hard. And would love to know, like, from a relationship building perspective, did you feel like, because Lisa was so much in your corner, that from an adaptability standpoint and from a transition standpoint, it made things easier, it made things more comforting? Or did you feel at certain points some apprehension, or what was going through your mind? Like, I'm sure there were a lot of emotions.
I think it's scary for people to change careers. And I get a lot of people, I have a lot of people who reach out to me from news who are still currently in that world. And it's scary to think about, you've done one thing your whole life, and now you want to do this other thing, and you almost question yourself. And do I have these skills that I can use doing these other things? And the answer is, of course, yes. But you question and you worry and you wonder. And so I think having conversations, with someone who's done it is helpful. But at the time, and Lisa will say this, my biggest asset was knowing what I didn't know, which was a lot. I was very aware of what I didn't know, and I asked a lot of questions. And she was really good with feedback on stuff that I was doing. And I'm not someone who shies away from the feedback. I'd rather this one person tell me than I do something that screws up in front of a whole bunch of people. I'd rather you tell me now, like, this, you should do this, this, and this, or not that. So it kind of went both ways. It was my willingness to admit that I didn't know exactly what I was doing. I knew I had the parts and I knew I could put it together, but I needed that space to do it. And she gave me that space. it's rare. I think a lot of TV people have a hard time finding a good first job out of TV because it does take someone to make a leap even a little bit. Because, like you said, sometimes it's like if you don't have the exact skills or 4 years of experience doing X, Y, and Z, and I'm like, I'm 44 years old. I can do that in my sleep, but they're very black and white sometimes about jobs. And especially with AI these days and the bots that weed people out when you apply for jobs, it's hard and it's hard to make that transition. So I feel very fortunate that she gave me that space to make mistakes and help me. At the time I was, maybe 40, but it can be a weird thing to be a 40-year-old in a new career. And you have to be humble in some ways and just know I've got space here that I'm going to need to grow into. So,
Yes, and I love the media relations aspect. I mean, I love all aspects of public relations because I love writing, I love
yeah.
communicating, I love reporting. But when you represent clients and having spent over 8 years in the financial services industry, heading up the business development for WaveCapital Partners at the time, I loved working with clients, and we were responsible for facilitating debt financing and equity investment for their businesses. And raising capital is such a hard skill. It has nothing to do with journalism, but if you try to find a couple of things that could overlap, if you're organized, if you're disciplined, if you communicate effectively, if you are someone who can work in a team environment and you're building a relationship with your client, you're building a relationship with capital providers, and you have to partner them together, and it has to be a perfect situation where it works for all sides. Well, those skills, they go with you wherever you go next. And when I've been interviewed on cable network television or local television or digital platforms, I was my own advocate. I had a press agent for 6 months, and he helped me at the time. This was about 4 years ago, getting opportunities to write digitally or to go on digital platforms to talk about topics I love, public policy or financial news or what's going on with current events with the Biden administration at the time. But the media relations aspect of me pitching myself to media outlets and getting on myself, I mean, that was gratifying for me because it was the first time in my career that I was actually taking my journalistic skills and having to think about, okay, pitching myself, pitching an idea. I have years of experience working with these type of clients in these specific industries where there are stories happening across the country and around the world that apply to the industries where my clients operate in. And I have experience working with those clients, and I can speak intelligently about, let's say, cybersecurity story or something to do with energy or something to do with healthcare or something to do with real estate. So I love doing that. And so talking to someone like you who gets to do it every day, I'm curious to know, what's your favorite part about Nickerson? Is it the client interaction? Is it the helping your client get a TV spot? Is it finding the clients? What do you love the most about your job?
Yeah. So I guess there's a couple different things, but honestly, one of the biggest things is I like to visit with my clients. I just came from a lunch with one of our clients who's actually based up in New Hampshire, but they happened to be driving through this area and they had emailed and said, can we get lunch? I'm like, yes. I mean, being in a newsroom for so long, you're so used to a hustle and bustle and bumping into someone every 2 feet. It was a strange thing for me to go remote from home. I'm like, you can only talk to the dog so much, right? Like it was, I need to be with humans. And so I take any opportunity I can to go and visit with our clients. So that's definitely the human relationship part of it is probably my favorite part. From there, I love doing the strategy behind what businesses, because every business is looking for something different when they come to us. For some people, it's literally just they want to be on TV or they want their name out there a number of times. For other groups, it's a little bit different, and there's select places where their audience goes or listens, and you have to be a little bit more strategic with how you're placing what you're doing with them. But then it's not just traditional media anymore, right? It's influencers and Substack and all these other places. So you have to be able to think about all different media and how it would work for that client, because our clients vary. We have everyone from Simon Property Group to Big Brothers Big Sisters. Like it's a very wide range, some real estate companies, developers. So I get to sort of put on a different hat every few hours. And that's one of the things that I loved about news as well, was that it was kind of a variety all day long. I wasn't stuck doing the same thing day in and day out. So that sort of keeps my interest. But truly, at the end of the day, I adore the team that I work with. And anytime we get to meet and co-work together, we make every excuse to do that. And then it's the clients. We just really, really enjoy all the people who we work with. And it's nice to get to see them outside of work, so to speak, sometimes and just grab lunch.
You mentioned Simon Property Group, and when I was a board of director for the Charlotte Chamber of Commerce when I lived in Charlotte, North Carolina, and I was a real estate broker. I had my real estate licenses in North and South Carolina, but I love civic engagement. I love doing things that have to do with economic development. And so for 2 years, I was a board of director for one of the main chapters of the Charlotte Chamber of Commerce, which became the Charlotte Regional Business Alliance. But that was after I had moved back to Florida. But one of the fellow board of director colleagues of mine, he was a general manager of Simon Property Group. They're the largest commercial REIT in the world.
Yep.
And that's so cool that you could look at your client base and it's a diverse group of business executives and leaders who come from all walks of life. And relationship building is a big aspect of what you do in public relations. And so, how much of the relationship building part do you love? I mean, just you said it yourself, getting to have, lunch with a client who's coming down from New Hampshire, but do you look at them not just as clients, but, long-term colleagues where you could see yourself doing things for them, not just maybe for a year, but you want to also invest in their futures as much as they're investing in yours from a professional standpoint. Because when I was with WaveCapital Partners for over 8 years, we cared about having long-term clients. I mean, one-off opportunities or products were great, but we really looked at our clients as very close colleagues, or just it was a very familial type of relationship.
Yeah, because I mean, we have those one-off projects as well, and of course we take them. It's very different work, but our bread and butter is really those longer retained relationships. And particularly with Simon Property Group, we do 9 of their centers because obviously they're all over the place and we don't do all of their centers, but we have the centers, 9 of the centers in Massachusetts and New Hampshire. And I mean, I think I just completed 3 years with Nickerson last week, but I feel like I know some of them so well. And part of that is, yes, they're clients, and yes, we want their business. But at least at Nickerson, we really try to think of things in a much bigger picture, how we can also connect our clients and what things we can connect them with outside of, our own bubble to help them as well. So it's introducing them to other people who are in our network. It's not just straight press. Sometimes it's really more about helping them build the relationships that will help their business as well. And even clients who, have maybe rolled off, we still keep them in the loop and we're following them on LinkedIn. And if something comes up that they'd be a fit for, I'm going to send it to them. I'm not going to say just because they're not paying us, we're not going to do that. It's just sort of you build that good faith over time. And it just feels good to do that. And those are the kind of relationships that we like to build.
That's great because we did the same thing where we had retained clients, but we looked at it from the standpoint of, just as you explained it yourself with Nickerson, value add is what I would always coin that type of relationship, because you represent them and you have a schedule of services that you have to complete for them, and that's why they hire you. But we always thought of value add opportunities, introducing them to non-clients, or I would always do extra research and read about their industry as much as I could, as much information as I could absorb, so I could think of ideas from a strategic standpoint of, okay, this is how we approach a situation, or this is the type of strategy we should go into when we're talking to this investor or this lender. And I always had to put my clients first and foremost because my fiduciary relationship was with my clients. But at the same time, I had to understand the mindset of an investor or a lender, because he or she has to get comfortable with their credit teams and the people who have to do their due diligence and their underwriting if they're going to approve a loan, or if they're going to approve a line of credit, or if they're going to have shareholders want to be mindful of, okay, if we're going to invest in this project, everybody has to be on board. So definitely understand and appreciate what Nickerson does, and especially the media connection, the media element, which is so important. And final few questions before we depart from our interview. I just want to thank you so much again for your time. When you think of the state of the country and the world that we live in, politics does play a big role in America. I would say it's really the 800-pound gorilla in the room. We live in very polarizing times. So, from a journalistic perspective, with your journalism cap on and your PR cap on, how do you take a neutral approach? Because you're going to represent clients perhaps who have different political affiliations. And it just seems to me that politics does creep into the day, no matter what topic you're talking about, or no matter what you might hear a colleague say or what a client might say. And it just seems like every conversation, if you're not mindful of how to steer it somewhere else, politics comes up. And I think that's the challenge as professionals, our age, because we grew up in a time pre-social media. And we also grew up in a time where there was more unity in this country. And now, as we get older and start raising our own families and have our own kids, they're going to be growing up in a different world than the world we grew up in. So, how much does that cross your mind too when you're representing your clients?
It definitely crosses my mind. I sort of try to treat it like Thanksgiving dinner, right? We try not to bring up politics in any way, even though I love everyone at the table. It's not something that I will ever get into on purpose. Having said that, listen, we've been talking about tariffs with some of our clients and how they're affected by the tariffs that the president put in place. And so there are direct impacts on our clients because of things that are happening politically. And it's hard to totally steer clear of that. So I think the best thing, and this is my specialty, but I'm a master at sort of talking around things in the sense that I can take the opinion out of it completely. So it's more looking strategically at how something is affecting their product and guiding them as to, what makes sense about that. So it's okay, I don't need to know what you think about the tariffs, but these are happening, right? So how do we manage that? How do we manage the backlash from it, from customers, et cetera? It's certainly not by taking a stance on it for the most part, because you're never going to please everybody. There have been a few times where clients have, sought advice on whether they should address certain things in a newsletter to customers. And honestly, the advice is usually no, because you're going to tick somebody off. And if you can sidestep it, at the end of the day, somebody's looking for a product from you. They're not looking for your political opinion, although we all have them. And I don't really even want my clients knowing what mine would be. So I try to never even delve into that so that I can remain strategic about the work at hand and not be swayed by one way or another in terms of, what the president said today or what he didn't say or what he's doing or not doing, which is challenging because it's easy when you get into a client relationship to say things off the cuff, but that's one of those things that I'm very careful about. And we live in Massachusetts, so you can guess how most people feel, but you never know. You never know. So I just think it's always better to play it safe that way.
Of course, you certainly never know. And wonderful thing about Nickerson and where you are, because you're in a major metropolitan area like Boston, and because it's a bigger city, for the most part, but it sounds like you know very well where most people's political affiliations lie. So you have a sense of, okay, if our clients are going to be more local to the area, that's different than if your clients are further out or maybe out of state. What is the percentage of clients in the Boston area versus, does your clients spread all across the country, or is it only central to the Northeast?
So both. We have clients all over the place. But even when I think about our clients here in the Boston area, I mean, I say Boston area, I really mean everywhere from New Hampshire to New York, but the population in New Hampshire is a very different makeup than the population in Massachusetts. So right there, you have a very different makeup politically of people. So you just really have to take that part out of it, because that's also the only way you can really solidly and strategically think about the work at hand. It's, like I said, we all have opinions, but the opinion doesn't help you make a decision that's going to get you emotional about whatever you're deciding. So we try to keep it out of the political realm, but even though it's challenging, and that was a challenge as a journalist too. I think people have these notions of, if you work for a Fox station, you're conservative, and if you work for NBC, you're obviously like a loony liberal. And I've worked for both, and guess what? I haven't changed in terms of my political leanings. Like, the idea is that you're supposed to be, neutral and a journalist, but people think what they want to think and will paint with a broad brush, but always best to try and keep it neutral.
Yes, and now it's almost as if that journalists, whether it's audience members or people who are tuning in every night, they want journalists to take a side, which wasn't always the case. I mean,
No.
journalists are always neutral and they keep their personal beliefs to themselves. But, with my podcast, people look at me even over the years when I was being interviewed on media outlets and say, like, you're almost like a hybrid. You're a journalist with an opinion. For example, I was interviewed on Fox Business Network and I was interviewed by Ashley Webster and he was filling in for Stuart Barney. But the way I delivered that 3-minute segment as a analyst, you could tell where my political affiliation is. However, I really did a good job of still staying neutral. But
Yep.
if you know me, you're like, okay, he went on Fox. He tried to deliver a very neutral position, but we can see where his affiliation is. And that sometimes it's unavoidable. But Ashley was a great person to have him interview me because I felt like it was old school, that it didn't matter what the network was, that he
Right.
asked 3 questions, I gave 3 answers, and it was a great segment, in my opinion. But I've been on Bloomberg, I've been on conservative, I've been on liberal, and I've been on, neutral platforms. And it's a great challenge because depending on what your affiliation is, it's a challenge to be able to put yourself in a situation where if you are like one way leaning in terms of the thought process, but if I'm talking to somebody else who has opposing views, I'm still able to give what I believe compelling reasoning or logic in my estimation of how I interpret it, and people respect me for it because I'm not trying to take my opinions and make them feel the same way I do. I actually feel like I'm in a position of educating, and that's what we are as journalists. We educate, and that's the most important
Right.
thing. Final question I wanted to ask you about, what's it like being a mom and raising 3 kids, and how gratifying that is for you as a mother, also as a working mom, and what family means to you. And then my final question after that is any final words on relationship building before we depart from our interview?
Being a mom is my favorite job, and they're 8, 11, and 13. They're just the best. They've turned into these little people with their own thoughts and ideas, and it's so fun watching them become individuals and see what makes them tick and work hard at things and fail at things and figure it out. And it's just, I feel very lucky that I have 3 kids who are, they're great. They're great to each other. They're great to me and they get along really well. I always say to them, I'm going to remind them in their teenage years when they're murdering each other, how well they got along when they were younger. But truly, I even learn things from my kids at this point. They surprise me all the time. And it truly is my favorite thing being their mom. So I feel very fortunate to have more time with them now that I'm doing this than I did when I was doing TV. So yeah, that's the best. I wouldn't change it, but I also wouldn't stop working. It's a nice balance for me to get to do both.
Absolutely. And final thoughts about relationship building. I believe you touch upon it because you talk about your kids and how much they mean to you, but just relationship building in general. Any final thoughts that come to mind that we haven't talked about already? Things that you feel in your mind, relationship building is truly what your own personal definition of it is.
I just think it's the basis for everything we do, whether it's work or things you're doing in your community. Kids play on sports teams, and then you have that community of parents from the sports teams and the relationships that you build with your village, whether it be your work village or your home village. Those are the things you fall back on, when you need something, when they need something. And I just don't think there's any replacing that human connection. We talk so much about AI these days and what AI is replacing. And for me, it only heightens the importance of those relationships and how much we need to continue to cultivate them. That's something that AI is never going to replace, right? And I think you should hold them even more dear and don't burn bridges. I've kept in touch with, I had a lot of help along the way. I'll say that. I had great mentors. I had women who helped me get back up to Boston, and I'm still in touch with all of them. And I just think that's one of the best things you can do is give some of your time to someone who wants to have a conversation. I know people did that for me, so I always turn around and do it as well. And that's just more of the relationship building. It's what makes everything go round.
Yes. And I love the fact of how you recognize that AI is there and it's going to become a much bigger emphasis, I believe, in our future. But thank goodness we're journalists at heart and that we value communication and we value team building. The essence of what we do is how to build a consensus and how to get everybody rowing in the right direction. And client relations is a big part of it. it's also that human connection. It's, bringing value every day, working really hard, wanting the people you represent to know how much you truly care. And you're the face of an amazing company, and you and your team do an extraordinary job. And I'm so fortunate to interview you today because you having the history in Florida with Fort Myers and Tampa, and then just remembering again, it goes back full circle, remembering your interview when you had interviewed Billy Mays and him living just a few minutes away from me. And I just remember the helicopters flying above my house. And it just brought me back to a time coming across that interview and how we connected, because you never know in the continuum of life who you're going to meet and who you're going to come across because you read something, you saw a video online, it moved you in a way where I felt that when I saw your interview, I'm like, I want to connect with Shannon because she has very fascinating story, where she was a reporter and an anchor at a news station that I got to know when I grew up in Florida, and that so many years later, now she's doing public relations. But it's an amazing transition because you're right. When it comes to family life and when it comes to having a work-life balance, PR definitely is a healthier existence, so to speak, than having to work such long hours in journalism per se. But I want to thank you again for being my 111th guest on the Wave Capital's guest speaker series on relationship building in a team environment. Shannon Mulaire, the Director of Public Relations and Media Relations at Nickerson. Thank you again for your time, Shannon. I look forward to staying in touch.
Thank you. The pleasure was mine. Thanks for having me.
Yes, absolutely. I hope you have a wonderful rest of the day and look forward to staying in touch.
Thanks, Garrett.
Take care.
You too.